Some of the tools we use for finishing techniques have been around for a long time. When Walter Hunt invented the safety pin on April 10th, 1849, he had no idea how popular this little gadget would become with machine quilters. Well, since it took him less than 3 hours to develop it, Walter thought $400 was a fair price for the rights to his invention, which he sold the same day. Well, almost everyone has uses for safety pins. Franklin Delano Roosevelt safety pinned the pages of his outdoor speeches together after a paper clip failed to hold up in a breeze, just as he was to make a pertinent point. Well, this box contains a timeless treasure. It's referred to as the quick and easy darner. And if you look closely at the lady pictured sewing in the 1940s, you may guess. It's a darning spring. Well, it fits any machine, and the cost was $1, as it still costs today. Now, it can do all kinds of wonderful things. The instructions say it can do plain or fancy quilting. Just add the professional touch. Or how about embroidery and applique? Work in colors. That's great. And on the other side, it tells you how to make buttonholes, as well as how to darn socks. Well, pretty amazing for just a little piece of wire. Now this is another favorite treasure. The colorful front cover shows women dressed in the latest fashions, and inside are sewing needles of all sizes packaged in bright pieces of foil. Ooh, and they're very sharp, strong needles. So much fun to collect. Well, let's take these things downstairs and see how Cynthia is coming along with the quilt. It's a good thing safety pins were invented, because we certainly used a lot of them in the triple Irish chain. Now, Cynthia, I found some great notions in the attic for you.
Oh, you sure did.
Look at this.
Oh, geez.
Looks just like you.
She sure does. Those must be antiques.
Oh, she's just hanging over her sewing machine, working hard.
She is.
Now, what are you doing?
I'm doing some free motion stitch in the ditch using the darning foot. I have my feed dogs dropped, and what I'm doing is holding my hands in a triangular shape so I can manipulate the fabric, and I'm also running my machine at an even pace.
Now, I like the way you have that quilt just up over your shoulder there.
That helps me control the fabric.
Takes all of the weight off of the table. It's on your shoulder so you can move. Now, you could do this step with the walking foot as well.
Yes.
So what's the advantages of using the darning foot?
The advantage is that when I come to these corners, I don't have to completely turn the quilt. I can just keep going, just right around the corner.
It saves you a lot of time. You don't actually have to raise the presser bar and your walking foot, lift and pivot the quilt every time, because there's a lot of 2 1/4 inch squares on that quilt. It would take forever.
Now, I've come to the end, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and lock right off.
Okay.
Doing that forward and backward motion that we talked about before. I'm going to raise my needle, and I'm going to pull it away. And we're going to go ahead and clip that thread just like we did before.
Great. Now, you've been using wool in this quilt. How do you like that wool?
Oh, I love it.
Oh.
It's wonderful. It's so light and easy to maneuver.
I found that wool needles well by machine, and also if you'd like to go ahead and do some hand quilting on the same quilt, it's perfect for hand quilting as well. Hand quilting, machine quilting, wool is the best.
Right.
Like it.
Now, I know you've been dying to do the feathers, so let's go ahead and we'll take a look at what we're doing today.
I'm ready.
Okay, this is the template that we've decided to use. And I'm going to show you right here how to machine quilt this particular stencil. We're going to start here at 1. We're going to go right up the feather sewing. We're going to go to 3, and then we're going to stop when we get to the next feather and backtrack right over the edge, sewing in the same spots. We're going to go over the top of the next feather. We're going to stop at 1. We're going to go up the vein, over the top of the next feather on the alternating side, backtrack over the top, go over the next feather, back down the vein, and then we're going to alternate back to the other side, up and around, and then down. You're going to keep doing this, alternating on either side.
So you actually need to sew over some of your previous stitches.
That's
back
right.
and forth.
It's the only way to do feathers.
Interesting.
So let's go ahead and do this. I'm going to go ahead and drop the thread into the fabric like we've shown before. We're going to do this by one stitch. I'm going to bring that bobbin thread up to the surface just like we did before, and I'm going to go ahead and hold that before I sew. Now I'm going to show you a tool that I think is really helpful for doing this technique. This tool is flexible, and this flexibility allows you to spread that fabric out so that it makes the fabric flat.
Now what's on the bottom of the tool?
Okay, down on the bottom of the tool there's these little rubber pieces that actually help you manipulate the fabric.
Grips it.
That's right.
It's like a steering wheel there, Cynthia.
Yeah, you're going to rest your hands right on top of these knobs here, and what it does is it helps you to relax so that your shoulders are more relaxed and dropped, and it helps you feel more comfortable with the quilting process. So let's go ahead and try this.
All right.
Okay, so I'm going to hold the thread for just a couple stitches here. We're going to go drop the needle down. We're going to go backwards and forwards about 3 times. I'm going to go right up the next feather. When it comes to the feather ahead of it, I'm going to stop and I'm going to backtrack over the top. And while I'm thinking of it, I'm going to go ahead and clip those threads away.
So they don't get mixed up in your work. There's
That's right.
nothing worse.
That's a good reason for bringing those threads up from the bottom too.
Right, doesn't get all tangled.
So we're going to go down the next feather, down the vein, and stop, and then we're going to go to the alternating side just like I showed you in the picture. I'm going to go over the top of the feather, backtrack in the same spots, down the next feather, down the vein, up the next feather, and we're just going to alternate side to side just like we did before.
I like that motion, and I can see, you know, when you're normally machine quilting with that triangle and your shoulders are up, oh, it gets so painful right in here.
It sure does.
That's great.
You know, the nice thing about this tool is that people with arthritis, it really helps with that wrist action because they're actually just resting their hands there, and the tool actually does the work.
That's helpful. Great. Well, Cynthia is using the round stencil, the round template for the wreath, but you could actually go ahead and get different shapes of stencils. For instance, you can get a stencil with feathers in the shape of a heart. And these are nice big shapes around here. I can just see flying right around that. And then in the center as well, there's straight lines for grid quilting in there. You can also get square feathers. That one works well. And you can also use feathers in the border. Now in this quilt on the wall, you can see the feathers running along the border on all 4 sides. There's actually some chain stitching in there right through the block. And then down in the very corner, you can see the holly wreaths, and there's a 1/4 inch stitching right around each one of those holly wreaths. Now this is a double Irish chain. It was made by Sue Bouchard in those reds and greens. She loves to use it at Christmas. And Cynthia did the machine quilting for her. Now the template that Cynthia used to mark it with is this one right here. You can see all the feathers going along here. Here's the single chain going in. Now if Sue wouldn't have put that holly in the corner, Cynthia could have used this one to finish off the corner. It's just a continuous line and goes on. You can see how that makes that square shape right in the corner. Well, that's a great one. Let me show you a really fancy one. Look at this one. Now this one has a double vein in it. You can see right along here the 2 veins are running through, so you really need to work on 1/2 at a time, and then once you're finished with the 1/2, go back and do the second half to create that double vein. Now I could see just running, maybe a string or something heavy right through that double vein, create a trapunto effect. to finish that off. So there's all kinds of feathers you can use to add dimension to your quilt. Now, how's yours coming along?
Well, it's coming right along. I'm not quite done with it, but what I'd like to do is go ahead and lock my stitches off here, and I'm going to show you another one that's already completed. So I'm going to go backwards and forwards like I just showed you, and I'm going to go ahead and lock those stitches off, clip my threads. I'm going to move this tool to the side, and we're going to go ahead and take a look at this feather here.
Ooh, that is beautiful. You can see it's pinned right in the center, pinned all around the outside edge, anchored right in there. Boy, that's great.
Turned out really nice.
It does. It looks good. Now, Cynthia, we could go ahead and do more stitch in the chain. We could do diagonal lines through here. We could even go through that background square to add some more dimension. There are a number of different ways that you can just continue machine quilting through the triple Irish chain. This is the very first free motion quilting project that I did. I appliqued some flowers to a pillow front, and then I layered it with batting and then just stippled in the background all around those flowers. It was just great fun to do. It was just like making worms all over that pillow front. Easy. Now, Cynthia, stippling is actually easier to do than the feathers.
You're right, Elle. In this Radiant Star quilt, we've done a feather design here. But then right in the middle, we've also done some stippling to add some detail and some dimension.
And that's just a great way of just filling that background square.
It sure is. And in this quilt, which is called the Dresden Plate, we used a tight stipple in the background of here, in the center, and also in the borders. Now, this takes practice, and I can tell you that practice makes perfect, and perfect takes practice.
What a good motto, huh? Well, actually, it brings that whole plate out of that background right there.
It sure does. What we're going to do today is we're going to do a practice. We've taken two 18-inch pieces of muslin and a piece of cotton batting, and we've put those together. But before I did that, I actually had to do some marking. In the open spaces, we're going to do some stippling, and I'm going to show 3 different techniques. But before we do that, I want to show you how I marked this. I took a spool, and then I took my pencil and I just drew around the spool, and that makes that mark. And I did that all over the area, and that prepared it for the clamshell. Let's go ahead and try some stippling.
Now, Cynthia, you actually did that little clamshell on John's quilt. On the birds, you filled in the...
That's right.
So it's all just a process of filling in background.
It sure is. Now, I dropped the needle down, and I brought my bobbin thread up to the surface. I'm going to go ahead and drop my needle down again. And what we're going to do first is what's called regular stippling. We're going to just sew, kind of like driving down a really twisty, windy road.
Oh.
The faster your machine goes, the better it looks. And you do this by filling in the area. So I could fill in this corner and actually fill all the way out.
Now, the larger the area that you have to fill, you take large loopy stitches. Then the smaller area, then it's smaller meandering stitches. That's a good word for it, isn't it?
Yes, and the key to this one is don't cross.
Don't cross.
Right.
Well, that's an easy rule to follow.
Okay, and we're going to go right off into the next area, and I'm going to show you what's called loop.
Okay.
And it's loop stippling. We're going to just come right into here. It's small loops. This one's really neat for background, and if you do it really tight, it actually looks like pebbles. So if you had a little walkway or something that you needed to do in a design, you could actually add those in. Now, if you notice, I've got pins in place, and as I'm sewing, if I need to, I can actually just take those pins out, stop, take them out, put them away, throw them over my shoulder like you do. Well, maybe that's not a good idea.
No, I don't think
so. And then just keep going.
So that's a frivolous type of idea too. It would be great around flowers, I think.
That's right. So then I'm going to go right into this next area. I'm going to go ahead and take this pin out. We're going to try another technique, and this technique is great on ethnic looking quilts. It is actually straight line quilting.
Interesting.
In a stippling design. And you can get relatively close together on these.
Maybe you could use that technique if you wanted to make it look frightening. If you could make
That's
stitching
true.
look frightening, that would be a good one on a Halloween quilt, wouldn't
Right,
it?
little kids' quilts.
Oh
Okay.
no, not for little kids. We don't want to scare them.
Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and just lock this off. We'll stop here because I'd like to show you that clamshell technique. Okay, I'm going to bring my thread up to the surface. I'm going to go ahead and clip my threads here, and I'm going to pull that away, and I'm going to move down here. I'm going to drop that needle right down in and bring it up, and I'm going to pull the threads from the bobbin up to the surface. Then we're going to go ahead and lock those stitches in place. I'm going to do my forward and backwards motion about 3 times, and then we're going to go right over the top of that first clamshell.
Now when you go across that whole row, Cynthia, then do you drop down at the opposite side and go back across, or how do you do that?
I sure do. And again, when you run across a pin, just go ahead and take that out.
You don't
throw it
like
over your...
sewing over pins.
No, not good for the needle. If you do sew over a pin, you do need to make sure that you take the needle out and replace it, because you have damaged the needle and it won't sew a neat stitch.
How long should you actually use a needle before you change or replace it?
You shouldn't use your needles more than about 8 hours.
Of sewing time.
That's right.
That's probably where a lot of us make a mistake. I sew a lot longer, I know, than that on a needle.
Okay, so if I got down here to the end, I could do some backtracking, and I could go down on the next clamshell, and then I could just keep going. And we would just keep going over those humps.
Whoa, what movement!
Meeting at the peaks. It's a lot of fun.
That's a great practice. Well, actually, I did a different type of practice, and it was fun as well. I took this piece of muslin that's been pre-printed with a quilt design on it, and they're nice, open, easy lines to follow and do. And all you need to do is just layer this with some cotton batting and some backing, safety pin it together, and then just outline stitch and stipple right in here. It's a lot of fun to do. And this is actually my finished project. Right here, you can see that once it's laundered, then those lines come out. And the great part is that if you went off the line, you can't even tell once it's washed and cleaned. So this was my second practice, and it's true that practice does make perfect. Cynthia has plenty to do with the machine quilting, so I'm going to add the binding to Nana's garden. Now I've already cut 3-inch wide strips, enough of them to go the whole way around the outside edge of the quilt, plus an extra 12 inches. And then I pieced them into one long strip so they're ready to go. I've already pressed it in half with the wrong side inside so that it just fits around the outside edge. Now there's approximately 2 inches of batting and backing sticking right off that first border. I have my walking foot back in place. Those feed dogs are back on right now. 15 stitches to the inch, a little bit longer, and I'm starting right towards the corner of one side, and I'm going to leave approximately 6 inches open on the end. And you just line up the edge of that presser foot, keep it flat, and actually I do like to put a little pressure. I'm pulling just slightly on that binding so that you don't get a flared edge. And as you come into the corner, you're going to stop the width of that seam. So I'm coming right down in there, right there, put my needle down, and then once you are the width away from that edge, just raise your presser foot, turn your whole quilt to the second side. This is getting good. Can't wait to finish this. And then just drop your presser foot, and I'm just going to reverse right off the end of the quilt. Just sew right backwards, raise the presser foot again, and pull it forwards and free it up. And then once that's finished, just take this edge and fold it straight up on the diagonal. You have to make a perfect 45-degree angle right now, and then with your fingers hold that flat and fold the top back down over. We're actually just creating this mitered corner right underneath it, and then you can just pick up sewing right where you left off, right on that batting and backing, and sew forward. Once again, little bit of tension, little stretch on that binding. Just keep on going around the outside edge. Ooh, I just want to do a few more stitches. It feels so good to be sewing again. Well, once you've gone around all 4 corners and then you get back to where you've started from, you're actually going to make a seam right in that binding, right with this end to finish it. But then you're going to take your rotary cutter and your ruler and line up the edge right along the edge of the binding and just trim that away. Actually, some people like to leave maybe just about 1/4 of an inch or so extra, kind of fill that as well. But trim your batting away, trim your backing away, get rid of that. And then this is what the corner looks like. As you pull this back out, you've got that perfect miter that just pops right in there. And from the back side, then you can do it a number of different ways. Here's the stitching right here. Now, I personally really like to finish this by machine. Boy, I just can't ever get to all my hand stitching. So I roll the binding so that it completely covers that previous line of stitching. And I pull it so that it goes right over, and I pin it. And then once I have it pinned on the back side, going the whole way up to the corner, let's see if I take this piece right here. This tucks in so that you've got that perfect miter on both the front and on the back. And then from the right side, I just turn it over, and usually with invisible thread. I do like to use an invisible thread, and I would put a purple bobbin in and just stitch in the ditch right along there. And that works great. Well, Cynthia likes to hand stitch her binding down. So I have a wonderful tip for the hand stitchers that like to put their binding in by hand, and it's with fusing thread. Now, I've often put the fusing thread right in the bobbin, but then I also found out that you could just go ahead and run it right along the top of the fabric. So once your binding is done, only if you have cotton batting in your quilt, you can go ahead and cut off a piece of fusing thread and line it up right underneath your binding strip. Turn that over, and then with an iron, just fuse the binding in place. Now, the reason that you're going to fuse this in place is to take the place of all of those straight pins. Oh my gosh, have you ever sewed a hand-stitched binding down with all the straight pins in place? So if it's pressed down like this, then you can get rid of all those straight pins. Now, all I really need to do is get the label on the back. And I picked out some beautiful ones for Nana's Garden. I'm going to use a permanent marking pen, write my name, Cynthia's name, and date the quilt. And then all I really need to do is just take that label and just stitch it right on the back of the quilt, and it'll be finished. Well, Cynthia and I have some binding, machine quilting to do. We'll have some wonderful things to show you. I finally had a chance to work with this binder on this old Wilson, and it is great fun. But I think I prefer doing binding on my modern machine. It's a lot easier.
Hi, Elle. How's it going?
Hi.
I brought the quilts back to show you.
Ooh.
They're all done.
Great.
Let's take a look at the first one.
Now that Nana is pretty. Look at that.
It sure is. You know, these motifs only took me an hour and a half to do the whole thing. Went really fast.
Not bad. I love the little corners you did too.
Oh yeah, they turned out really cute. Yeah. I wanted to show you these clips that I found. I know that you like to do your binding by machine, but I do mine by hand, and I use these clips to hold the binding in place as I hand quilt that.
That's a lot safer than those straight pins, boy.
Sure is. Want to help me hold this one?
Look at this one.
This one turned out really pretty.
Triple Irish. Love it.
Motifs only took me 15 to 20 minutes a piece, so really fast technique. And we did the stitch through the chain here, and up here we did in the Seminole border, stitch in the ditch with the darning foot.
That
really
was
nice.
That's good outlining on it. Oh, and it feels so good. Love it. That's that wool.
It sure
Cynthia, I found a quilt. You are not going to believe this. This was done by machine.
You are kidding.
No, look at this.
Wow. Wow.
Look at the tight stitches. It's good, such straight lines. I love it. No puckers, probably no walking foot. Boy, let's look at the, and I think actually it was the wool batting in it. Pretty heavy, but it feels good.
It sure does.
So why don't you do some machine quilting and add some dimension to your life?
And may your quilt stitches always be even ones.